All right. Okay. Well, we'll get started. We got about 50 on, which is awesome. Thanks, thanks to everyone for joining in. Let me start. I got a few things to say before we start, and then we'll get started with the good stuff. Yeah, welcome to this first running science happy hour. Kind of a crazy impromptu idea I've had for a while. I think it seems that a lot of good conversations are happening on Twitter lately, and so I figured it might be worth bringing people on a virtual call so we could discuss these things somewhat in person. And so a few things before we start. I really want to say a big thank you to Novell USA for sponsoring the series. So Maria and Susan at Novell have always done a lot to support events and sessions and workshops in the biomechanics world and beyond. So I'm really happy that they were willing to come on and sort of trust me with this and to have you guys on. So, just a quick thing about Novell. I thought it was fitting because we'll talk about, shoes, and we'll talk about coaching and training and injuries, and some of their product has been great from a research standpoint, and of course from an applied science standpoint from monitoring training in runners. So really fitting sponsor for our series. So once again, thanks so much, Maria and Susan, for the support. And I know you wanted to say a few words, so I'll give you the mic now, I suppose.
Thanks so much. Just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to sponsor this. Sorry, I had a little friend jump on my lap right when I started to speak. So thank you so much for this opportunity. We enjoy sponsoring these kinds of events and listening and learning what's new and how our products can be used out there. We know some of you from the biomechanics world, but certainly not all of you. And so it's great to be able to meet some new people in this format that we can. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'll put our email address in the chat. And if there's ever anything we can do for you, please just feel free to reach out. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Maria. Okay, so again, the purpose here is to get a bunch of people that are running nerds together into a room and talk about various topics. We've got scientists, we've got coaches, athletes, clinicians on here. I've already seen many of you. That's the whole purpose. And we've got, there's 4 of them set up. This first one is about footwear and performance, but I'm sure that things will sort of deviate from that a little bit at times, and that's totally okay. Hopefully the discussion grows organically. I was going back and forth in terms of what format to use, and I kind of settled on a Q&A, like a moderated Q&A, if you will. So I received a lot of questions via email. A few were posted on Twitter, so thanks for those. And the idea would be that I'll kind of start the discussion with some of the questions, and then we'll let it kind of flow as it does. I've asked several people to be on the call in addition to an invited guest, and I've specifically reached out to Wouter Hoekhammer, who's assistant professor at UMass Amherst, Shalea Kipp, who's a PhD student at UBC and Olympian in the steeplechase, and then Laura Healy, who's a research scientist at UMass as well. So they've agreed to be on. I hope that I can pull them in as much as possible to ask questions, because they've done a lot of work in this area. Before I start, I want to mention, by the way, for all you running nerds out there, Wouter, who's an assistant professor, he has personal best in the 400 of 48.69 and a marathon PB of 2:33. That's some range if you've ever seen it anywhere. But anyway, I didn't realize that, Wouter, but that's impressive. Okay, so next up, I wanted to introduce the 3-time Olympian, 2004 in Athens, 08 in Beijing, 12 in London, and a 10K marathon, 10K in that order. He was also 4th in the Olympic trials for the marathon in 2012. PBs of, this is just insane to say out loud, but 12:56 in the 5,000, 27:22 in the 10,000, 2:07 in the marathon. And now has transitioned to professional coaching with the On Athletics Club based in Boulder, which is sponsored by On Running. So Dathan Ritzenhein, Good to have you, man. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me.
Great. So I'm going to start with Ritz to get these things going here. I'm going to ask about shoes and performance and kind of get your perspective as an elite runner and coach. But I want to set this up with this question. So your half marathon PB is 1 hour, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. This was set in 2009, right? So you know where I'm going with this. So do you think that 2009, if 2009 Ritz had access to the current shoes, you could now say that you're a 59-minute half marathoner?
I think I'd be getting close to that 58, 59 type mark. So
Yeah.
For a long time, or actually for a year, my PBs were 2:10:00 and 60:00. So I improved the marathon for sure, but I think the half marathon for sure, I had a lot more in the tank. I think even in the footwear of 2009, I had a little more in the tank, but it was a championship race, which maybe dogged a little bit early on. But yeah, it's a different world, that's for sure nowadays, and I don't know how I feel about it.
Well, let's get right into that then. So, you touched on it a bit, but in your opinion, so are these shoes changing distance running worldwide? And how does that factor into your coaching and maybe your own running these days?
Yeah, 100%. It's changed. I mean, now where we're at from 5 years ago or so, it's just the training is adapted, the racing is adapted, and there's no going back at this point. So I think that we're seeing innovation across the line now. We definitely are on. We're trying to part of our team was moving into the performance world. It was a relatively young company, so we've had a little bit of time to make up, and with COVID there's been some challenges for sure, with getting testing done on some of our product and things like that, but I think all brands are really looking at that right now, and a big shift has been you'll see that in the major marathons. People have adopted it now, whereas maybe before you had people a lot of times doing marathons in training shoes, and so with elite runners, we've definitely I have to think of it like a tool, like anything else, I guess. There's a place and a time for these new shoes, but also come race day, you got to have the best thing on. It makes a big difference nowadays. It's not like it used to be, where the biggest difference is maybe cutting weight. That's not really all that can be done with footwear anymore.
Right. So on that, of course, there's been quite a bit of research out there on shoes now, and I wanted to kind of piggyback off of your comments there about improvements in shoes, and I'll bring in a few of our sort of on the session scientists here. So I'll start with ask a question for Laura Healy. So there's some debate as to how much the carbon fiber plates actually do, or how much they contribute to performance. So what's the answer?
That's a good question. I don't have the magic answer. I don't think anyone has that magic answer yet. I think so. My most recent study, we've been trying to tease apart kind of what makes up these super shoes, and because we do know that the Nike Vaporfly and these super shoes do improve running economy, but there's so many factors, and so we were trying to tease apart what the carbon fiber plate did. So we actually cut the carbon fiber plate to reduce the longitudinal bending stiffness, and there wasn't a difference in running economy between an intact shoe and a cut shoe. So that kind of told us that maybe the carbon fiber plate isn't doing all that we originally thought it was doing. I think it still could play a really large, we didn't completely remove it, so it's still doing something in there with the foam and the overall geometry. But the plate itself, I think that study was surprising to me that that maybe it's not all the plate, and it's kind of the sum of these other factors, being the foam and the kind of overall geometry of the shoe.
Right. And so what you just alluded to, Laura, about the plate was still in the shoe, of course, so it's still interacting with the foam in some way. So are you kind of saying that potentially just having something there that's rigid that holds the foam together might contribute?
Yeah, that's kind of one of my hypotheses. I think we know that this foam is really soft. And so the plate probably holds it together in some way, and the geometry of the shoe in general could be important, and the plate could be holding the foam together and keeping that geometry the same. And the way we cut the plate, we reduced the longitudinal bending stiffness of it.
Right.
But the fact that it was still in there could still be contributing to that overall interaction with the foam.
Right. So Matt DeWald asked, where was the plate cut?
Yeah, so we made 6 cuts in the forefoot, so kind of up until the middle of the foot, and they were cut along on an angle kind of where MTP would be through across the plate. I guess I don't know if I get a picture.
If you guys can see Wouter's screen, he's showing with his finger where it was cut in multiple spots.
Yeah, and we cut just through the plate. So in the forefoot, the plate is a lot closer to the bottom of the shoe, and the curve makes it go up towards the top. So we cut through the plate in 5 different locations across the forefoot, and then did some material testing and found that it was dramatically less stiff in flexion and in extension in our cut shoe.
Thanks, Laura. There's another question about the shape of the plate. So you cut the plate, obviously it reduces the bending stiffness of the shoe, which means the shoe is a bit more flexible in this direction. What about the actual shape of the plate, the curvature of the plate, where it is also, and these types of questions? What do we know about that at the moment?
Yeah, I think we know that the curve does matter, and Emily Farina presented on that in 2019 at Footwear Biomechanics, and she did find that the plate, a flat plate versus a curved plate versus no plate, the flat plate was actually worse for MTP and ankle mechanics, and the curved plate was better. So we know that in terms of mechanics, the curved plate makes a difference. If we look at over like all the studies that have done running economy in plates, the ones with the curved plates have the best savings, but those are also Vaporfly shoes. So there's a lot more going on there. So I think that there is definitely something to the curved plate versus the flat plate, but because there hasn't been a lot done on it, except in the Vaporfly, where we know there's all these other interactions and contributions, it's hard to specifically pinpoint if there's an ideal shape or how much exactly that shape matters. Right,
gotcha. So that makes sense. It seems like there's a lot of interactive factors there, and it obviously plays a role in all these aspects. You mentioned someone asked what the MTP joint was, the metatarsophalangeal joint. Thanks for Karen and Derek for saying that. When you said, if you don't mind, Laura, can you expand on? Thanks, Wouter. Can you? I've got the translation in the corner there. Could you expand on what you mean by it improved at the MTP? What does an improvement mean at the MTP joint in the context of performance?
Yeah, so when you run, you lose work at your MTP, so you do more negative work, so you lose work, and so the curved plate, I think she found that you didn't lose as much work, so you had energy savings at the MTP joint. You're not doing as much negative work.
Got it.
Can I make a comment a second?
Dathan,
so, over the last couple of years of my professional running career, I was part of, two different companies that developed shoes. And I started actually developing, this would be before these super shoes came out. I just started developing a hallucis rigidus in that first metatarsal joint of my right foot. And so I started using it just because the bend, it allowed it not to bend. And I was able to run progressive. I mean, for really, like, I wouldn't have been able to run for like the last 4 years without it. Like even now today, I run in our carbon plated shoe every run. And the biggest thing that I would notice is, just not having, I don't know if it was so much the rocking motion of the shoe or the stiffness taken out of those, for the forefoot of that shoe. I was able to run fine, and I could run like a half a marathon and not have sore calves. Whereas before that, like when I read 60 flat, I could barely walk for a week, you know? And so there's a definite change. Now, whether or not that's like a performance, you know, benefit, I don't know, but like, but there's significant when, if you can run a half marathon and not have sore calves, then there's something is going on.
Right. Right. So that's a good point. So we kind of talked about the performance aspect, and it's also, it might be, there's some anecdotal reports, and even you're mentioning it now, Ritz, that runners feel a bit less sore, especially at the calves, following hard sessions or long sessions or races in the shoes. To me, obviously, that seems like a potentially an even bigger benefit in the sense that if you can handle more training, you know, you might get even more out of it. So, is that something that you think, Ritz, that would have been as valuable to you, obviously, earlier on before all these issues?
I think later in my career, it was definitely a benefit because I was able to do more volume than I was in those years prior to it. I started to be able to not handle quite as much load. And so in the later years, I was doing all my quality sessions in shoes like that, even some long runs, because it would just exacerbate the pain in my big toe joint. So I started using it more for that, but then I would notice that I'd have a lot more soreness in my quads, but my foot, you know, felt a lot better. And so it became like a tool to use at certain times, but then I couldn't even think of going back to doing a hard session in a different shoe afterwards. And it's somewhat addictive in that way. And I find that even with my runners now, like the feel is very good and you don't feel beat up. So they want to continue to train in them, and, you know, forcing people to not has been kind of a principle, I think, that we've tried to use a little bit.
Right. So runners already have addictive personalities, and now we're throwing this tool that's making it worse. Fantastic. So Dathan, I'm going to jump from that since you're talking about injury stuff. Amby Burfoot, who's on the call here, I see him in the middle of the screen here, asked, you know, seemingly, Dathan, you were indestructible in high school, despite some pretty intense training. And then later on, of course, you know, as you mentioned, that superhero powers perhaps went away. So, you know, how does that relate potentially to not just shoes, but what you've just discussed?
Yeah, I was very destructible in the rest of my career. So it started out really good. It started good and it got worse. But I think I think that you can get hurt just as easy. It's just going to be different things that are going to get hurt for sure. And maybe it blurs the lines of where you're going to, where you should push and where you shouldn't. And so sometimes it's a good thing. I mean, if you're getting close to the end of, you know, a session and you have a problem, like I just know, like there's a lot of people that just that rocking motion helps plantar, you know, issues for a lot of people, and not all plantar issues, but some, and or even Achilles problems sometimes, you know, but not all injuries are the same, even if they're the same area. So I've kind of had mixed results in some capacity. And you know, one of the guys I was coaching, Parker Stinson, he had a really bad knee injury, and I'm convinced it's just because of so much of the work that the quads are taking from the shoes, you know, like, and never really had knee injuries before. And I really believe that there's going to be a lot of people that you can easily jump, like your body adapts. So like if you use them quite a bit, you know, maybe you start getting stronger and your quads, all those tendons and stuff like that. But if you jump right into it, you might be able to do something that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Just like any other injury, maybe there's less of a load through your lower legs, but more through the upper part of your legs. Then something's going to break eventually, and that force has to go somewhere. And so,
Right.
Yeah.
So this is great, Ritz. You're like doing all the work here. You're segueing into everything I want to talk about.
I planned it all.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's the good thing I think about these things, where we bring in athletes and scientists and coaches, and so I think just hearing these different ideas and perspectives, I think is quite valuable. So several questions were asked about what you just mentioned. So the idea that you know, maybe I don't know that there's evidence yet that it does actually increase load on more proximal joints like the knee and the hip. I'm pretty sure in Voucher's study that wasn't the case. But like you said, the load has to go somewhere, at least, you know, from a, I think with Voucher, you can confirm here, but I think it was work that was unchanged, right? I'm not sure if I don't know about torques or anything like that.
Yeah, so anything above the ankle was basically the same. So knee and hip mechanics didn't really change. But I mean, that was for this guy, the OG prototype of the 4%. Right now, we're talking about next percent vapor flies. We're talking about alpha flies. And we're talking about different brands with different plates. So yeah, I can definitely see that might be different. And my own experience in the alpha fly running marathons was also that my quads were, even though I ran a very fast marathon with them, at the end I was struggling to not fall over because they were so bouncy and my knees were bouncing around.
So then I guess one of the questions was like, you know, how much do we consider potential, you know, unwanted or negative adaptations? I'm not sure negative is the right word, but at least unwanted or unexpected adaptations in that case. So is anyone is there anybody on the call, and you can type it into the chat, but any experiences, at least clinically, perhaps Emily or Mark Temi I saw came on, or Colin, any type of, you know, at least evidence or anecdotal at least that some of these injuries have popped up? You can unmute yourself if you want to as well and just chat. Kim, maybe. Kim, you've got some experience with these shoes also. Kim Hebert-Lausier in New Zealand. Anyone? Kim?
Hi, Max. Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for putting this together. And it's a decent time here, so which is good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've studied the vapor flies, the VP4. So you know, we're not talking about the alpha flies or the next percent. And I know that most of our runners complain somewhat about the medial lateral stability and some of their concerns around you know, twisting their ankles and things like that. And in New Zealand, anyways, a lot of people do go out a little bit more on trails and running on uneven surfaces. So akin maybe to the Hoka One One, there are some concerns around the stability in the medial lateral plane of the VP4 anyways. So that is one of the considerations. And, you know, to echo some of these, you know, these thoughts that the load potentially needs to go somewhere else. So one of the concerns is in terms of disuse and, you know, not to say maladaptation, but, you know, decreasing loads at the ankle. You know, calf muscle is also an area that I'm really passionate about, and what would happen long-term in terms of, you know, continuous wear of VP4 or carbon fiber plates that reduce the work around the ankle. Could be that you lose some of those adaptations in the calf muscle. You know, so there's a question here around, you know, is there still a benefit in the use of minimal footwear in terms of maintaining that kind of strength ability? I would advocate that yes, there is definitely, and or download the calf raise app and, you know, strengthen your calf muscles. That's also a good thing to do.
Nice pitch. Nice pitch.
Yeah. By the way, validation is on the way. People, stop sending me emails, okay?
so Kim has an app that it's a clinical app that allows clinicians to measure calf strength pretty easily. So that's a nice tool.
Yeah. So I mean, I do think that there's some considerations there, and whether or not, you know, we see a shift in terms of, you know, not favoring, but, you know, in patellofemoral injuries as well because of that loading around the knee joint. And I think, you know, Dathan, you kind of highlighted it yourself in terms of that people not wanting to go back. So are you now creating a breed of runners that, you know, are a little bit dependent on these shoes for running mechanics? And, you know, the one thing that I find fascinating is that they do change the association of economy with traditional biomechanical measures that we would typically associate with improved economy. For instance, a lower, vertical displacement of the center of mass is associated with improved economy. And then, but the VP4 does the contrary, where you see an increase in the vertical displacement of runners. So we're actually fundamentally, from my perspective, changing some of those typical associations that we've seen in the literature. So yeah, right. Definitely an interesting area to consider.
Thanks, Kim. Appreciate it. Celeste Goodson down in Franklin, Tennessee asked, what's the name of the app again? It's MyCalf, is that right?
Calf raise. I'll put a link on the
calf raise.
On the chat.
Celeste.
Yeah.
Okay. Paul,
I've got an anecdote that I'd be curious to hear people's perspectives on a bit. I think it's relative to what we were talking about. I'm just a lowly college coach, so I'm barely keeping up with the biomechanical terms you guys are throwing out. But I do work with my assistant, who he ran 2:15 for the marathon at Chicago. I think the same year Parker ran, his great run there. I believe he ran those in the next percents. And then he goes to the trials, and those of you who were there or heard, Nike was giving everyone the Alpha Fly at the trials. And so he literally got it the day before. And in his mindset, he felt he had to wear it in order to compete because everyone else was going to be wearing it. And I wouldn't say I directly coach him. I maybe advise him. And as I'm watching him race, I'm looking at what it's done to his stride mechanics. He actually, his form reminds me a little bit of Dathan's. He would be characterized as a bit of a grinder, maybe not the textbook form. And it seemed like the stack height effectively raised everything up, but he didn't almost have time to I don't know if harmonize is the word, but that was how I came to think of it in terms of adjusting to the fact that he was now effectively higher off the ground. And he had some really acute angles from his foot strike. He had a bit of a crossover gait that got exaggerated as it raised the stack height up. And obviously the Atlanta course was so challenging, but it just obliterated his lower legs. So, I mean, obviously it wasn't the ideal set of circumstances for him to throw those on before running a marathon for the first time. But it did seem like, at the very least, it takes time to adjust to new mechanics, but maybe it may not be ideal even for certain high-level runners, depending on their mechanics. So I share that anecdote. I'm curious to hear if my theories are totally off base or if there's something there.
No, I think that's great. Last year around this time, I sort of made that same argument where we're still talking at the time about regulating the height, and people say we should just regulate the height, and then we don't care about innovation. If people put 10 carbon fiber plates in 1 inch, that's fine with me. And that's where then I was saying, I think people paint the extreme idea that at soon we have 10 inch thick midsoles and even worse. And I was sort of saying in that scientific paper, sort of going over some of the other related research is saying that's very unlikely to happen because of these issues that you just point out. The more midsole you put in there, the less stable it's going to be when you're running on trails in New Zealand, when you're running an Atlanta marathon course. Those things are going to be tricky. Taking a turn at the speed that Dathan is running his 5K at a 90-degree corner on a road race, you probably don't want to have 40 millimeters under your feet, or you have to be really trained with it, right? So yeah, I definitely think that makes sense. And still, I mean, that doesn't really end the whole debate about the stack height regulations and everything, but I was just sort of saying I don't see the far future going really big there because of this issue where you come further off the ground and impose instability, injuries, taking turns at high speeds, ankle rolling, those kind of things.
Yeah, Ben, I at the trials, I heard several athletes who mentioned what you just described. Is they got the shoes and they felt like, if I don't wear these shoes, I'm at a disadvantage effectively, which is interesting, right? Because the number one rule of distance running typically is before races, don't change what you've been doing. And then all of a sudden, at the highest sort of level of marathoning in the US, you know, a large number of people did just that. So it's quite fascinating what the shoes and even the science that supports the shoes performance, how it's changed, how we even behave, which is quite fascinating. Paul Blasey, Paul, I've never met you, but hey, thanks for being on the call. You know, the idea might be that, yeah, we perhaps don't train in the super shoes and only race in them, right? That's kind of that's how I think initially people were thinking about it, is just, you know, wear them to race, but not necessarily train with them. But it seems that now more people are training in them, and we've discussed a bit some of the potential issues there. It seems though to me that, again, it goes back to behavior and expectations. Where like, oh, if I train in like non-super shoes and then I wear them to race, I'm going to be a lot faster. At least it's going to feel faster. So Dathan, is that something for you, like as an athlete, but also as a coach, like prescribing, you know, footwear perhaps? Are you trying to look at footwear as a way to, you know, be able to do more training, or would you rather save it more from a performance standpoint on race day? Because there's also psychological factors there.
Yeah, there's a little bit of both, I guess. What you said about the people feeling like they had to race in Alpha Fly on race day, it's gotten into the psyche of all these runners are in their heads already, you know, and so a lot of them have to feel good to run fast, and but you know, I try to tell them all the time, look, I ran 2:07 in a pair of Flynet racers with a popped airbag because I had a problem in my foot I had to cut out. So like at the end of the day, you have to be able to do it no matter what. And so I don't care what's on your foot. Like you have to believe you're going to be able to do it. And so, but that's part of the, you know, like the coaching part, right? But I know also that it makes a big difference. And so I want them to see where they're going to be, maybe if they put on the best version of their shoe. And it's okay then in the workout, hey, that's 2 seconds faster in the super shoe. And we remember that because I have everybody who people respond differently. Like Kim was saying, you know, stuff about, you know, the calf. Well, you know, a fellow New Zealander, we have Jordy Beamish on the team. He's got calves that look like two hams. I mean, these things are gigantic. And for him, he responds very well to the shoe that we have that is yet to be released, because there's just something about those gigantic calves that, like, I don't know why, but he responds very well, but he doesn't have a lot of the negative side effects either. Whereas, you know, like Ollie, look, I don't know, he doesn't respond the same. Like it just doesn't make a whole lot of difference, you know? And so I want them to feel really good in whatever they're going to race in at the end of the day. And if we can do more in any one thing without having the negative side effects, then we do it. But I am still an advocate, like you said, about strengthening in other ways. So like I just saw Ollie walk out the door here for a second run, and he was wearing the Cloud, which is like just, you know, move it around. It's like a nothing shoe, you know, like it's almost a casual shoe, you know, but it's very minimal. And so then if he does his long session that he's going to do this weekend in our beefed up super shoe, then I feel like we're getting the best of both worlds. But we can't just forget about, you know, what made them good in the first place. And so what made each of them good in the first place, their body is adapted to. So if we utilize it right, then they can take it on race day and feel very comfortable with what's on their foot. And so they don't have to have a shoe with a popped airbag under the forefoot.
Makes sense. Thanks, Dathan. Dathan, just for context, Dathan was referring to Ollie Hoare, who's a 335 1500 meter runner. So not a 334. Sorry. Was that in Nashville?
That was in Nashville, and I think he'll run a lot faster. I think he'll run a lot faster soon. So
I'm pretty sure. I texted you a photo of him throwing up afterwards. So I should have known the time.
Ollie could do anything really. He could probably run with the, you know, barefoot and still do it. But yeah.
All right. So again, Dathan comes in clutch with some nice segue, talking about different style and things like that. So One of the questions that I had was, and this is a question that I have as well, that one of my students, master students, will undertake, and Voucher has agreed to be on her thesis committee, is that there's kind of I'm not sure it's a big debate at the moment, but some questions around style and how different running styles might respond differently to those shoes. So the big running style difference, of course, in distance running is going to be a foot strike pattern. So if you run with a more of a sort of heel strike pattern versus a more of a mid or forefoot strike pattern, which of course we see quite a bit of these days, because in the mid 2000s that was pushed quite a bit, and I think a lot of people kind of viewed that as the way to go. And then, but we also see it at all levels. We see heel strikers at the elite level. We see heel strikers at the novice level, and vice versa. So big question is, what's going on with that? How might super shoes, I'm calling that just because I don't want to just say Nike Vaporflies, but just overall broad super shoe term, how might strike pattern here influence the outcome? And it seems to me that the rolling aspect of the shoe is one, the geometry of the sole, the foam and the plate. It seems that with a rear foot strike or a heel strike pattern, we potentially might be putting more into the whole structure of the shoe and potentially getting a bit more out of it in return, as opposed to a forefoot strike pattern where the plate might not be engaged as much, especially with heavy forefoot strikers or more like toe runners. My wife, Lauren, who runs for NAZ Elite, her heels never touch the ground. And so it's one of those things where always wonder if the benefits are the same. So any thoughts on that? I'll start with you, Voucher, just since you're pretty well ingrained in this literature.
Yeah. So I can't tell who was in the study and whether they are still on the call or not. But I also saw that Shalea did join, so I'm kind of want to bounce this question to her.
Oh, is she?
She doesn't want to answer.
No. I don't see Shalea on here. So maybe, there she is. Okay.
No, I'm here. Sorry. I was doing that thing called research that we all love to talk about.
Oh, there she is.
Sorry, I'm a bit late. Yeah, for us, forefoot and heel striking, I mean, I'm kind of with you, Max. There is going to be kind of a little more roll. I'd also think there'd be more energy storage for a heel striker compared to a forefoot runner. That, of course, is all speculation, but that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, and then so when we looked into that, so when we did the first study, we had 18 runners. We were lucky enough to find size 10 runners that could run that fast. We weren't going to tell we only want heel strikers or we only want forefoot strikers. But luckily enough, we sort of ended up with an 8 to 10 split in our 18 runners. And then when we basically did that analysis, it was sort of like what we as scientists don't want to say, trending towards significant or borderline significant. So I just normally just don't mention whether it's a thing or not, but we did see that if you would take the average savings of the rear foot striking, it should have been the Nike Vaporfly 4.5%. And for our midfoot and forefoot strikers, it would have been the 3.5%. But like I said, that is sort of taking an average of 10 versus an average of 8. Scientifically, that didn't fully came out really strong, but it sort of confirms what both of you are saying about the heel striking being better.
Voucher, did we think there was also an effect of body weight though with that sample?
I don't think that was necessarily there. It's tricky because when you start testing sub 31-minute 10K runners, you're not gonna find your 200-pound runner or your 100-pound runner. So it was a very narrow range of body weights to find an effect.
Plus, I suppose the marketing around the 3.5% forefoot, 4.5% rear foot would have not gone very well on the shoe marketability. Okay, good. So, wow. So yeah, you guys have been great with all the questions and content. I'm going to bounce back to Dathan. I have a list of questions, and there's a list of Ritz specific questions. So one of them is not necessarily about shoes per se, but just running form in general. There's a lot of biomechanists on this call. And so, we as biomechanists, we're kind of, I wouldn't say all of us, but many of us sort of tend to think there's a, good biomechanical way to run. And that's a thing that we can chase. But it seems that you were at one point in time, at least you were coached, to run specific form, at least from reports, at least online. And so how much do you think that contributed to one performance and or injury? And do you use that now with your coaching? Like how much do you emphasize form and movement with your coaching?
I've completely shifted my belief, I guess. Back when I underwent the big form change, Alberto was very adamant that I had to shift from rear foot, to forefoot. And I definitely, within the first 2-3 weeks, I was injured. And that's the result of what the arthritis, that I have in my big toe joint now is a direct result of that all those years ago. And it was a slow degenerative process, I think, but there was no mechanism to get there. It was just like, okay, this is what Bikili looks like. Let's look like that. And that was it. And so then, okay, I was hurt. So would slowly evolve to trying to, we got to try to get strong enough to do that. And, but there was a conscious thought process to try to change the way I physically ran versus, actually thinking about it on the run instead of letting anything happen. And so I didn't know any different. And so but now I've completely, actually my mechanics over the last, they actually did slowly come back to just very mid foot striking. I don't think it was sustainable for me, but I also can't go back to just running the way I used to. Like it's like after a certain amount of time, it's like it completely changed the pattern enough that it doesn't feel comfortable anymore. So I don't recognize myself now like the person that ran 12:56 to maybe a few years later. I don't recognize the stride looks different, but I never really felt better or ran better either. Definitely at high speeds, almost the opposite. You think at high speeds, maybe the thought was always you should look more like that. And really, I did, maybe if anything at slower speeds, I ran a little bit better, having shifted forward to midfoot, and it seems almost the opposite. So like my runners now, it's like they see the strength coach and the therapist, and we make suggestions to the strength training program based on what we see there. And we try to, any changes we get is out of, things that we do in running, and it's a slow process versus trying to just copy what someone else looks like. And now I do think though that when the younger you are, maybe the more likely you are able to do that. Like my son, he runs exactly like I do now. And I know that if anything, he should run exactly like how I used to run, if it's a genetic thing. And so he watches me though, and he sees that what he recognizes is a form. I have videos of it, and it looks like we're twins. And if anything, he should look like I did when I was 24, 25, I think. And so, so at that young age, I think maybe he'll have adopted to something that will be beneficial to him, but I don't think in my late 20s, it was beneficial to me to try to do that.
Gotcha. So Ben, by the way, just, you might have a recruit here coming up in a few years. I would probably get on that early, pending NCAA violations. So Jason Coop, hey Jason, good to see you, said little shots fired at Alberto here. Other people's form is just lazy coaching. I like it. Okay, so on that as well, Dathan, I'm not sure if you're not commenting on that, by the way. I'm not sure, unless you want to, of course.
I didn't see what it was said, so.
It said chasing other people's form is just lazy coaching, referring to Alberto. That's
probably a good point.
Yeah. So just piggybacking on this, and you can or cannot answer if you don't want to, but what do you mind kind of explaining a bit what type of biomechanical changes specifically you were kind of asked to get after, or what?
So the premise really was that, so we started working with the Michael Johnson Performance Center then. And so, Michael Johnson, coming out of the sprint background, he didn't have anything to do with it. It was some of his employees, right? The goal was to adopt the way that Bekele ran. And so versus where I ran, definitely like I had my stride would land, my leg would land much further in front of me. So the goal was to come underneath me, forefoot down first, return heel to the butt like a sprinter. And I honestly just never felt better like doing it. I mean, it's very hard to do. I mean, maybe I felt better doing 100 meters, but I never felt better doing 100 miles a week on it, And so I think it makes sense if you can, like it just seems like it can't be done overnight, like, and I do think that there are things that you could change easier, right? And that have less drastic effect, but like, like slamming and pawing your feet to the ground, it's going to have an unintended consequence too, which I think I had sesamoiditis right away. Like slamming the forefoot of my foot into the ground, all of a sudden the bottom of my foot was, completely inflamed, and then the toe joint and all that stuff. So, I just don't advocate for that now. And if I do see something that I think is contributing to a problem, then that's a different story. So like, our best woman, Alicia Monson, amazing talent. She's 22 years old and she ran 31:10 in her first 10K. Well, she's very pigeon-toed when she runs, and we've racked our brain, like I was like, this something has to be wrong here, like this is going to be an injury waiting to happen or things like that. Well, we've had therapists go over and look at her, and there's not a reason why that they say, I don't know, I can't see what it is. And so I don't want to say I've just forgotten about it, but I've also said, well, maybe it's not a problem then. Maybe she's adopted something in the way her body's structure is. And so if I foresee then down the road that she's getting, something that's the reason why it's hurt, then maybe we try to adjust it. But right now I just, I remember my coach, it was maybe it was Kevin Hansen, or, like he's talking about Bill Rogers and, having one leg shorter than the other and that arm that always would do that. And so the body compensates for sure in some way. I mean, I always had this hand that I had a left hip, glute hip issues and rotation always. And I'd always have my right hand would drop out the back because there was longer time on the ground. So it made sense, but just fixing my hand to do this doesn't do anything if the problem is coming from the hip. So like the hand flicking out the back and opening up is just the last bit of energy flying out of the weakness coming from the hip. So I'm conscious of that. I just try not to get obsessed with those things. And, like if it's something that's super visible, we give it a good look. But then if we can't find a specific reason that everybody's like, this is so obvious, then we really don't try to keep chasing it. Right.
The old, and I hate myself for saying this out loud, but the old, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right. So, yeah, the whole idea of changing, how we move, right, and is this big question. And Dr. Allison Gruber's on the call. Allison, I'm gonna just, if you don't mind, just maybe commenting a bit on what we know in the literature about the evidence on switching strike patterns, the value or not of it from a performance and/or injury standpoint.
Hi. Not much. There hasn't been a ton of, say, randomized control trials. There's certainly been some studies that have done gait retraining, and there tends to be a benefit for, say, patellofemoral pain syndrome. But how strong that evidence is, it just needs more work. But in terms of switching for running economy, no benefits at all. So it could just depend on what your injury is, what your other gait mechanics are. I just don't think we have a good understanding of what really changes, or how one person might benefit and another person not benefit. So
I'm just, by the way, thank you, Allison. Allison humbly did not mention a review that she was involved with on this topic. So I'm going to put it in the chat box. There's a PubMed link to the review about the question is changing foot strike pattern beneficial to runners? Broad question, but there's really, really great review there.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thank you for doing that work and being on. It's good to see you. We talk daily. We talk daily, but text and in-person or virtual discussion is different. Okay, so yeah, we're kind of getting towards the end of things. Some great questions on there. Alex De Jong asked Dathan specifically, I suppose, is it sort of more difficult to transition with queuing multiple changes at once? It seemed like there was a lot going on there, like trying, like no pressure, but like run like Bekele, like, you know.
That sounds pretty easy, right? You know?
Yeah.
So I do think that that's true. Yeah. Like I'd find myself going on a run thinking, oh, you know, bring your hands up, you know, bring your pelvis under you, bring your foot to your butt. I mean, over and over again, I hated every run because it was like, I'm not thinking about going out and running and enjoying it at all. I was just thinking about like, oh, what did I forget to think about 30 seconds ago? And so I don't think you can do really good work on anything. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, your gait, your workout, you know, like whatever you do at work, your family, you can't split everything up. Like you have to get really good at something, and it takes a lot of work. And then once you've become good at it, it's easier to tolerate it, and you can move on to something else, and you don't have to think about that thing as much anymore. And so in my biomechanics, if it's, well, let's just start with, why do we have this one arm that pops out? Okay, maybe it's that hip. So let's just think about doing this exercises for this hip. Maybe we think consciously about this hip, but that's the only thing that we have to think about. And then eventually, if it gets a little bit better, the hip just takes care of itself, or it's maybe like 20% of our thought process versus 100%, and we can devote that other 80% to something. And so like, you can't, whatever it is, like, I mean, like Coach Wetmore at CU always used to say, you know, I don't want well-rounded runners. Well-rounded people were never really good at any one thing, you know, like geniuses weren't well-rounded. And so like, yeah, it's true, you know, like you have to be really devoted to something, and then once you master it, you know, it's just something that's in your repertoire. But like, yeah, I mean, women, I think are better, you know, like I can't even walk down the aisle, like I'm talking on the phone. Like my wife could do 8 different things at once. Maybe it's just a guy thing, but guys like can't multitask for the life of them, you know? So, so that's me, but I think that there's definitely like, there's some people are better at that than others, but I think to be really good at something, you got to like focus on it, you know, whether it's work or whatever. And so same thing in biomechanics.
Thanks, Dathan. So we got a few minutes. I'll bounce back to some of the, you know, shoe questions. I'll bring Shalaya back on here. She was nodding heavily at the comments about Mark Wetmore there with the lopsided runner. So lab studies show these % improvements in economy, which economy is the oxygen consumption per minute at a certain pace, let's just say, for now. And so you've done some work, Shalaya, showing that, you know, these might translate to much different % changes in actual performance. So can you kind of talk about this a bit and what these percentages might mean from a actual race performance standpoint?
Sure, yeah. So we think about running economy as, you know, the pseudo kind of how efficient someone is. But when we say there's a % improvement in running economy, it's really tempting for a lot of people to say a 4% improvement in running economy translates to 4% faster, you know, in some race. And the biggest thing you got to realize is there is air resistance based on what pace you're running. So if you're running at a faster pace, there's going to be more air resistance. So that percent in running economy improvement is actually going to translate to a slower time. And that's probably the biggest thing. There's also some intrinsic things about running that probably makes it not a one-to-one relationship. But yeah, it's going to be speed dependent. Whatever your percent savings is for running economy, whatever pace you're running is going to change how fast you're going to go.
Right. And then you mentioned some race specific details. We talked earlier about stability of the shoes. And of course, if you go on a course that has a good amount of turns, for example, or even Atlanta, a lot of downhill. I've run in a few of the different models of the shoes, the performance shoes, but I've never run in them downhill, like fairly steep downhills. I don't know what that feels like. Does anyone have any input on that, and how that might affect, I mean, I would suspect it wouldn't be that easy to do at a fast pace, like a 2:07, 2:09 marathon kind of pace.
Wasn't there a downhill sub-2 marathon attempt in Europe sometime fairly recently? Do you remember that?
Amby Burfitt might be able to comment on that.
I recall Jeff Burns tweeting about it, and it was just a total train wreck. Like they just fell apart. I can't remember the specific results.
I don't know, but
I think that was a sort of a last attempt to sort of, the people that don't like Nike and the two-hour marathon were saying like, well, if these crazy shoes are allowed, we're going to try to beat them by running down a very steep hill. And then they didn't break that 2-hour marathon, because otherwise we all would have known exact details of it. But so yeah, not really anecdotal, but there's some study done in Colorado right when I was about to pack my suitcase and move to Massachusetts, where Clarissa, who was working in a lab, did a study there, again, comparing our 4% shoe versus the streak shoe, basically the 0% shoe. And they looked into sort of the moderate uphill and downhill. And basically we saw that for the level, again, it was a 4%, which is nice confirmation in a different sample of runners that there was a 4% difference. Going downhill, that difference got smaller, and I think it was about 2.5%. Basically, going back to what Max just said, the most interesting part there was that we were sort of considering how fast can we run this study, and we sort of said we can do it based on equal effort. And so we did a 6-minute on the level, and then calculated how fast people should be running at the same effort, going down a 5% decline. And then we decided, no, that's way too fast. Then all of a sudden I could run a 6-minute mile on a level treadmill, but I could aerobically also do it, but I was running like under a 5-minute mile, I guess we get close to, which is crazy fast to do on a treadmill in a lab going downhill, no matter what shoes you wear. So we eventually decided to just fix the speed rather than the effort, and have everybody run the 6-minute level and the 6-minute down. But yeah, that's another really interesting thing to see. Sort of coming back to the idea was that the shoes would work better because they were so soft, and going downhill they save your muscles, sort of ID. But for a 5-minute trial, that didn't really work, and it was just hard enough to not bounce off the treadmill, I guess.
Gotcha.
Hey, Max, this is Richie.
Hey, Richie.
Hey, what's going on? So I have kind of anecdotal study.
Hey,
or
Richie,
anecdotal.
Before you start, I'm just going to introduce you. So this is Richie Anson. He's the coach of Roots Running in Boulder. Coaches Noah Jody, who's a 2:09 marathoner, and coaches his wife as well, who's just run 2:31. Is that right? 2:32?
Yeah, 2:30, 41.
2:30. Yeah, even better. So welcome, Richie. Thanks for popping in here.
Yeah, so one of the anecdotal stories that we have of where the 4% could actually be, or the super shoes could actually be a negative, was actually happened to my wife. We were over in Prague for her to run the Prague half marathon, and there was quite a bit of cobblestone on the course. And what was interesting is the athletes wearing the Nike shoes in there actually performed really poorly. Diana Curry Johnson, Amy Hastings Cragg, my wife included, and my wife ended up with a torn meniscus because of the instability. With about a mile to go on the cobblestone, her knee buckled in and she ended up tearing the meniscus. Whereas the other runners that were wearing the Adidas prototype hadn't come out at the time. They were wearing the Adidas Adios for the most part. They all performed really well. And Diana Curry afterwards was like, look, I was in that lead group for the first 10K running 69-minute pace. And then we hit the cobblestone section on the back half of the course. And I felt like I was just running like on ice skates, just very tiptoed, being super protective of where my foot placement was. And the Kenyan runners were just pulling away. My wife said the same thing. Like, she was still able to finish the race, but she was on 70-30 pace, ended up running 73 or 74 minutes, with the last 5K being with that torn meniscus. And it was that thing where it's like, now if we're on a course where there's a lot of tight turns, like, she won't even consider wearing the Alpha Flies because the instability nature of it. She opts, if she's going to wear the super shoes, she'll opt for the next percent. We have a rule in practice where we won't allow any of the athletes to wear the super shoes, particularly just because trying to protect for some of the turns that they're doing on repeats. We really have to be careful with what the nature of the course might be. Like you said, the downhills in Atlanta, most of our athletes opted for more the next percent, where it had the little bit of a lower profile comparative to the Alpha Flies, just because of that factor. So we've kind of changed our thinking just based on the way that my wife responded to it, having the injury coming off of it. But then also just seeing how, like, the little bit of instability that an athlete might have will be significantly amplified now because you're on a little bit more of a platform, especially when you're trying to run a lot faster. So most of our athletes 10K or down won't wear them in like 5K type road races. And the ones that do really haven't had the injury predisposition going into it.
Right. Well, Richie, thanks for that. We're over an hour now. I'm Lauren's in Flagstaff. I'm here in Memphis by myself, so I've got time. You guys can we can stick on and chat some more. Richie, I don't know how comfortable you are talking about this, but given that your group was sponsored by a different footwear company, and I'm not even sure if this is 100% true, but I'll ask you anyway, because this is informal, as I said. You guys, moved away from a footwear company so that potentially you could wear some of these shoes. Is that true? And if so, how does that play in? Obviously, there's financial implications. So, do you mind commenting on that?
Oh yeah, 100% true. We were going through a renegotiation with the footwear company. The footwear company that we were sponsored with before was 361, and we were very fortunate that they were, for us as being a relatively new group at the time, that they were willing to pay us as a group to wear their product and fully sponsor our team. When we were going through a renegotiation with was at the time that the 4% shoe was becoming a lot more prevalent. I think this was at the end of 2017 going into 2018. And they wanted to re-sign our team through the Olympic cycle. When we saw the effect that the shoes were having with the density of the field at the CIM meet at the end of 2017, where so many athletes, a lot of whom that we were familiar with, were running significantly faster times comparative to what they had before, we obviously had to make a decision of, do we sign on with a company that didn't have equivalent technology? We were pretty upfront with them and asked them, do you have any intent of trying to produce a prototype similar? Because we knew a lot of the other brands were trying to come out with their own versions. They said, obviously, we're very confident in the product line that we have. We don't feel the need to develop anything along the same lines. And so then it became a point of, okay, well, we either have to tell our athletes, you have to wear the footwear that they're giving you. We countered with an offer of allowing us to wear whatever shoe we wanted in racing, but we would still train and promote the product that they had already on the market. Or we asked for 4 times the amount of money that they were offering us for the ability. Like at that point, yeah, we could justify not wearing the competitor footwear. Our concern was we had gotten a pair of the 4% to compare in a workout with what our athletes were already racing in. And it was a distinct difference. Like our athletes were doing mile repeats starting in the 361 and switching halfway through to a 4% and instantly dropping 15 seconds a mile. And so we're like, all right, well, we know that there's something to this footwear. If like we're seeing a distinct performance shift in just a small sample size of mile repeats and 2 mile repeats. Now, whether that made a distinct difference over the course of their races, you know that there's going to be some difference, but would it have been enough for us to turn down the contract? And at the value that they were trying to re-sign us for, it didn't make sense, knowing that we're going into an Olympic cycle. We know that the number of competitors that are going to be wearing that other footwear was going to be pretty significant at the trials, and all the other companies that didn't have it at the time were going to be coming out with something if it's not the same, it's going to be close enough that you can justify not wearing that type of shoe. So for us, it's like, if I was a recreational runner, or would it have been enough to justify spending the amount on that type of footwear? I don't know if I would have gone that far, but in a competitive area where it's now like, okay, it's a difference between making an Olympic team or not, placing top 10 at a US championship or not. To me, it came down to, you either need to pay the athlete well enough to justify not being in that, or you have to run in what you think is the best on the market for you. And now for our athletes, like, some of them wear the Saucony prototype, some wear the Adidas prototype, some wear the Nike prototype, because this last year only Noah on our team was fully sponsored. But it's no coincidence that we saw a distinct improvement across the board for all of our athletes at multiple different distances, wearing what they felt was the most comfortable and confident for that time. And that's not to say that we didn't like the footwear that 361 was providing us. It just wasn't on the same level of what you saw performance-wise comparative to all the other brands.
Sure. So I suppose for all of us scientists on here, like there's aspect to shoes and technology that, you know, obviously we our job is to do all the science aspect of it, but there's other factors involved here. The financial aspect of professional running, for example. But in any case, thanks Richie for that. And congrats on all the great runs at the Marathon Project and beyond. Well, guys, this is about it. Thanks so much, Dathan, for joining in and spending time and sharing your perspective. Thanks to Maria, Susan, and Novell USA for sponsoring the series. We're back in a few weeks, I think in 2 weeks, with Aisha Pratlier, and we'll be focusing mostly on injuries. Aisha just signed a contract with Puma, so she'll be shifting gears. Wouter's got some stuff to say about that. We'll be back on and chatting about more so the injury aspect of it, but I'm sure there's going to be some footwear discussions as well. So again, thanks again for everyone. Wouter, Shalaya, Laura, thanks for your input. Thanks to everyone for asking questions. And this is being recorded. I will post on the site that you received in the email, and hopefully I'll see you guys in a few weeks. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Dathan. Thanks, everyone. Bye.